Hello, my name is Corinne Adams and I teach ceramics at Falmouth High School. Let me give you a tour of my classroom and then we will get started. This is my kiln room. I have two kilns. This one is currently cooling off, so you can hear the venting system going. And this is where we dry all the work. We have two very large tables where the students sit, and then we have cabinets where the students store their work. Each class has a designated cabinet. We have 10 potter's wheels. We have an extruder. It's my favorite tool. This is our slab roller, and my best friend, the pug mill. So hopefully during this video I can answer a lot of your clay questions, especially questions that you might have for the elementary classroom, middle school, junior high school, or even high school. Let's start with the very first, most important question. What clay do I use for my classroom? Well, that's dependent on a few factors. So let's start with the first one. Am I using white clay or am I using brown clay, and why? All right, so let's start off very simple. You can use white clay because it's almost like a white canvas that you're starting with, right? After the bisque firing, it will turn white, so your glazes will be nice and bright and colorful on the white clay, as opposed it will be a lot duller and darker when you're using brown clay. So that's one reason why you should choose one over the other. If you are more interested in staining your work with red iron oxide or some other wash, maybe you want to use brown clay. I use them both at the high school level for the different factors. So it's your choice if you want to use white clay or brown clay. Next question would be still, so what clay do I need? It also depends on what temperature you fire to, right? Most likely at the elementary, middle school, and even junior high school level, you only use low fire clay because your kiln can only reach a certain temperature, or you only have low fire glazes. Right, your clay and your glazes have to match. So if your glazes, most of the Amoco glazes, will say that they're cone 05, so you will order a clay that can be fired to cone 05. If you're using cone 05 glazes, do not purchase a cone 56 clay. Okay, that's very important. When in doubt, always call the manufacturer. And the last big factor, what clay do I need or what clay should I get, is your budget. Some clays are a lot more expensive than others, so look at the cost. So if you definitely want a white clay and you want it to be cone 05, look at the cost. Now some clays might be a little better for hand building, some clays might be better for the pottery wheel. Most likely you will do mostly hand building with the students. And your clay should have a short description, right? Great for hand building. Sometimes it has what it's called grog, kind of like a sand in there. That makes it stronger to hand build, also when you make larger pieces. If you're thinking about an outdoor sculpture, again, read the description. If it's not clear what the description says, you want to call the company and what they recommend. They should have that information for you. What clay should you get depends on, do you want white clay or brown clay? What temperature do you fire to? And what is your budget? That's the most important 3 factors on your choice of what clay you want to use and what clay you want to order. So how much clay do you need to order? Make the assignment first yourself, put it on the scale, and then multiply it by the number of students who are going to make that assignment. Clay comes in 25-pound bags and 50-pound boxes. So depending where you order it from, you most likely are stuck with a box. So that gives you an idea how much clay you need to order. Next question, where do I order my clay from? There's multiple places. This is for the Massachusetts Art Educators Association. So we are in Massachusetts. I order my clay from Portland Pottery, which is in Braintree, because I order a lot of clay, probably about 3,000, and then halfway through the year probably another 500 pounds, depending on where I'm at. You might probably, most likely you will not order 3,000 pounds of clay. You can order clay from Sheffield Pottery, which is also a big clay company in Massachusetts. You can order clay from School Specialty. You can order clay from Dick Blick. Those are a couple of the easiest places to order your clay from. What glazes should you be purchasing? That all depends on what project you're planning, right? If you are at the elementary level, most likely you're using a cone 05 glaze and a cone 05 clay. Amico has lots of different colors, so whatever your budget allows, get the number of colors. A small jar goes a long way. Some teachers like to use underglazes. Underglaze is basically a liquid colored clay. So if you work with underglazes, you can use it as if it was a paint. You can blend, you can water it down and get more watercolor effect. You can mix them. So let's say you have a black and a white, but you don't have gray. You can mix white and black to get a gray. So that's the awesome part about underglazes. You can apply underglaze at the greenware state, so when you're building it, when it's bone dry, ready for the kiln, you can apply underglaze, or you can apply it after the first firing, the BIS firing. Every other glazes, so the regular glazes, you apply after the first BIS firing. With underglazes though, it will need a clear coat, a clear glaze on top to get the shiny look, because otherwise it will feel rough and chalky. So you apply the clear glaze after the first BIS firing, and then you do a glaze firing. So the choice is yours. Do you want to use the 05 glazes, or do you want to use underglazes? There's other brands of glazes. Again, the most popular and most widely known is Amico. There is Duncan. There is School Specialty has their own glazes. There is Speedball glazes, or you can mix your own glazes. But that's a whole different story. That's a lot of chemistry. All right, next question I want to address with you is what to do with hard dried up clay. I run into the same problem as well. I have some clay left over from last year. It's kind of hard. I wouldn't want to work with it. I definitely do not want to go on the wheel and hurt my wrists. So how do I hydrate my clay again? It kind of depends on really how dry your clay is. And the other thing you need to keep in mind is how much time do you want to spend on it? Right? What's more important? Time spent on it while you could be doing something else, or time is money, would it be cheaper to buy a new box of clay? So just put that in your mind as well. All right, so for example, if this clay was really rock hard, what I would do first to try with it is get it out of the bag, get an old towel and soak it. Completely drenched, soaking wet. Then I wrap this around my clay block. And put it back in the bag. I'm gonna let this sit for 2 days or so, and every time I walk by, I kind of poke in it. If it's still hard, I'm gonna let it sit another couple days. If it starts to get softer, then I know I'm on to something. You can also check, let's say it's been a week, you can check if your towel is still wet. Most likely it is not, so you can try to re-wet your towel again and try the process over. If it's still not getting soft, I would just toss the bag of clay. In other words, it's taking too much time to get it rehydrated. So that's one way of rehydrating your clay. All right, another way of hydrating your clay is by poking holes in it and filling it with water and let it sit for about a week. That will really help you get your clay soft as well. So what do I mean by that, poking holes in my clay? I use a thick dowel. If you don't have a thick dowel, it could be a broomstick, it could be a drill with a thick drill bit, it could be anything, right? Or actually, I've used the back of thick paintbrushes as well. And so what do I mean by poking holes? I like to do this when the clay is on the floor. So I get the bag, right? Bag's on the floor, I got my dowel. I open up the bag and I literally get my towel, push it in, wiggle it some to make the hole wider, and make sure I am about at least 3/4 through so that all that can be filled with water. Depending how big your holes are, kind of depends how many you put in there. With this thick dowel, I put in 4, which is plenty. Next, I get water. I fill the holes. Close the bag up and let it sit for a week, and you should be good. Be nice soft clay to work with again. The holes, you cannot do that when your clay is rock hard and bone dry, right? There's no way you are able to poke holes on that. All right. Right, so this bag and clay has been sitting with water in it for a week. See, it's nice and soft. It's ready to be used. If you have some water left in the holes, just pour that out and you should be all set. All right, another way to hydrate your clay is, this is what I do at the end of the school year. If I have a lot of clay left that the students have worked with and it should be recycled, but we're not going to use that clay until September, I have the students break up the clay in many, many small pieces, and I have bags full of small pieces of clay, just like this. It's okay if the clay is completely dried out and bone dry. Actually works a little better if it is. This isn't quite as dry as I would like it to be, but it will still work. So what I do next is pour this clay into a bucket with water, or pour it in a bucket first and then add water to it. Like, I actually have 2 buckets ready to go. After the clay's been soaking for a couple days, I get just blobs of clay out and put it on a plaster board. I let it dry overnight. Sometimes it takes 2 days, and then it should be normal clay again, and I can recycle it. If it's still too wet and you want to speed up the drying process, but it's not quite mud, just too wet to work with, I make little cones and piles of clay. That way a lot more air can go around it, and this should be done by the end of the day. Wedge it up and you should have brand new clay again. And that is another way of hydrating my old clay again. Let's talk about that scary kiln. Everyone's kiln is probably different, whatever brand you have, how old it is, but the basics are the same for all kilns. So these guys up here are called peepholes. You can actually look into your kiln during the firing. You can leave some of them out at the beginning of the firing so all the moisture can get out. This is the computer. I'll talk about that in a second. This is what the inside of the kiln looks like. So this is soft insulating brick. It is very porous, so be very careful. Like, this can break very easy. So if you need to put something down at the bottom of your kiln, you're better off putting the taller pieces first, so you don't put your whole weight on this, because there's a good chance it's gonna crumble and break. If you're lit, also be careful with the kiln shelves to not poke any holes or dent it. These guys are the elements. This is what is heating the electric kiln. Right, the whole way around. You should have a set of shelves and some stilts to layer. And then most important, this thing right here is the thermocouple. This is what's reading the temperature inside your kiln. So right now it's empty and there's nothing in it. So it should be room temperature. Look at the computer. 54 degrees. So that's the temperature right now in this room. The other thing that is very important that your kiln should have is some sort of venting system. In this case, this is not at school. I'm at home right now in my basement. When I turn this on, it sucks all the, I guess, the fumes from the kiln here from the bottom up out the window. You always want to make sure that your venting system is working and that it's on when you are firing. If you do not have a venting system, do not fire your kiln when the kids are in the classroom. I fired this kiln without the venting system, and the carbon detector would go off each time. So just a tip right there. How do I know that if my venting system is working? Give me a sec, I'm going to show you. Right, so how do I know if it's working? I have a lighter. I took one of the peeps out. And you see how it's sucking in the flame? That means it's sucking all, all the air, whatever, from my kiln, what is in my kiln, down and out the window. Now, as I said before, all kilns are going to look slightly different. What is important during your first firing is that you are preheating the kiln, meaning you don't want any explosions. You don't want student work to explode and blow up in your kiln. So for your first firing, your bisque firing, you always want to go slow. Yeah, so if I'm ready, I need to stop this for a sec. Stop, because this one's done. All right, I want to do a cone firing, right? And I want to go slow. It's already asking me for a preheat. Every kiln is different. You might have to find it on the settings, but you always want to do a preheat. I always do 2 hours. So enter. What this means is that this kiln, when it's on, it's not going above 200 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours. That way all the moisture that's left in the clay has a time to evaporate. In other words, no steam will be trapped in my clay and then explode. You can still have explosions if your clay is too thick. Air bubbles don't necessarily cause the explosions. It's the moisture that's trapped in the air bubbles that causes the explosions. So again, to prevent explosions in your kiln, preheat your kiln for a couple hours. So all the moisture left in your clay can evaporate and the steam can go out. So let's say I want to do a regular bisque firing. I'm going to stop again. Alright, regular bisque firing. I'm going to do a cone preheat of 2 hours. Enter. If it's a bisque firing, I fire to cone 05. So I'm going to do 05. Enter. Speed. Slow. Enter. Hold. That has to do with your glazes. I don't need a hold. See, it's at 0. Enter. Now I'm ready to turn it on. So I press start. And the kiln is on. If I would do a glaze firing, I tend to fire to cone 6. That's the glazes and the clay that I use. So let's do this again. Give it a stop. Alright, so cone fire. I don't need to do a preheat on my glaze firing, right? It's not going to explode on me anymore. So 0. I fire to cone 6. Enter. Speed. It doesn't have to go slow this time because it's a glaze firing. I can go to medium or fast. That depends on your glazes. In general, if you're using commercial glazes, you can go fast. So fast. Enter. The glazes that I'm using, I don't need to hold it to get special effects, so I'm going to press start. And it is on. Oh, hold 0, sorry, enter. Start, and the kiln is on. It's as simple as that. So what are cones? Cones are helping you to see if your kiln reached the temperature you are expecting it to go to. You cannot always rely on the computer on the kiln or the pyrometer. Cones are made up of ceramic material that will melt when exposed to temperature over time. Cones run anywhere from 022, that's the coolest, to up to cone 14, which is the hottest. Again, at the elementary level, you will most likely use cone 05, clay and glazes. At the high school, I use cone 6, clay and glazes. When using cones, you use 3. For example, I use cone 5, 6, and 7. I want 5 to melt, 6 to bend, and 7 to stay up. If cone 7 would bend, that means the kiln was overfired. Just a couple more things. I use a cheap baby monitor when my kiln is on. So I'm pointing it at the computer part, and then I can track it on an app on my phone, so I don't have to be constantly in the studio when the kiln is on to keep an eye on it. In other words, don't just leave your kiln on, always keep an eye on it, or make arrangements with your custodial staff at school But I like to keep an eye on it. Cheap baby monitor will do the trick. When not in use, always close your kiln lid. It will last longer. It will, the elements will last longer that way. Always keep it plugged in. You do more damage by unplugging it and plugging it back in than by leaving it in. Just keep an eye on it. You want to make sure it doesn't get corroded and rusty. If that's the case, talk to your custodial staff. It probably needs to be replaced. Kiln shelves. Make sure you keep them clean and you use kiln wash. You can buy commercial kiln wash or you can make your own. By adding kiln wash to your shelves, this has to do with glaze firings. If some glaze drips on your shelves, you don't ruin your shelves. See that I had some glaze drippings up here. The pot still came off. I was able to grind it off a bit and add a new layer of kiln wash. It will make your kiln shelves last longer and longer. Alright, one last tip. Don't ever put anything on top of your kiln. If you're making it a habit to leave your kiln gloves on there, or a bat, or tools, or anything, you're going to forget it when you're turning on that kiln. And it will get really hot. You'll set off your fire alarm at school and cause some big problems. So make it a habit to never ever ever have anything on your kiln.